All right, everybody. This week we're going to be covering barrier analysis. This is actually probably my favorite of the tools. It just tends to mesh well with how I think about things and different issues that arise. But yeah, we'll see what you guys all think. So to recap, let's go into the Slack and see. I was really enjoying some of the conversations that were being had, especially the back and forth on some of the specific events. Um, it's good. I'm glad you guys are talking about corrective actions and kind of exploring different things that could have been going on. There's nothing specific I really want to call out, at least not at this point. I just think I'm just bringing up a lot of good questions this early in the in analyzing these events. And yeah, it's interesting to consider some of the corrective actions in our own life. Um, that was cool to see kind of what thoughts you guys had. Like Jamie with your knee. I have an ankle that was reconstructed, so I understand that a little. And yeah, checklist of things, Todd. I really wish my kids would do that. That would be great. But yeah. Oh, and the cruise control thing, Shane. So that's actually an interesting thing. Every single winter, we hear about that around here of, hey, don't use your cruise control because if you hit ice, your cruise control will try to compensate, send you into an overcorrection issue or some kind of a slide. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I want you guys to start kind of seeing and hypothesizing, honestly, when you see something that is obviously a corrective action, why did it happen? But so far, I think everybody's doing great. When I put on here new events and challenges. So, if you're struggling with some of the events, there are some of you picked events that are really interesting, but are going to have some different difficulties from the accident investigation perspective. Jamie, the Surfside building collapse is extremely recent, so that might be an aspect that feeds into that. Todd, you might find some struggles with the breakdown between Columbia and Challenger. At least if I recall correctly from the Columbia report, they reference a lot of things from the Challenger accident that should have been fixed or might have contributed. So just keep in mind as you run into that, if it doesn't totally match the archetype from last time or anything like that, that's all right. Reach out to me if you have any issues, but in general, you should be fine to just kind of progress how you think and just kind of explore it. And then lastly, if everybody could just put something in the chat here about what your thoughts are on task analysis specifically. Task analysis is a fairly, I don't want to say common sense, but it's intuitive in what we're doing. But I know a lot of times in a lot of different programs, even human factors programs, sometimes there's not a ton of time spent on the instruction of how to do a task analysis. So if that's something that any of you want to do for your this particular accident or a task in the accident or something, let me know. I can help you kind of navigate that if you need to. So now we'll go into barrier analysis. So recall, a barrier is something which, if effective, prevents a hazard from reaching a person, or more broadly, prevents a hazardous event from occurring. Barriers will be categorized also as different controls. Oftentimes you will see the term control more than you will barrier, but they're interchangeable here. So some different control options, you'll hear the term engineered controls, administrative controls, cultural controls. There are others as well, depending on your use case and environment, but these are the big ones that'll you most time will always see. So an engineered control is something physically created to control it. This could be a lead vest that gets draped over you at the dentist to prevent you from x-rays. That's an engineered control. Or a concrete wall around or a concrete not wall, but like a room that's holding some hazardous material or something. Those are engineered controls. They are considered the most reliable and the most effective ones in terms of controls and barriers. Administrative controls are the policies of the world. This is the, hey, you do have to put the lead vest on people. Oftentimes administrative controls are considered less effective than engineered controls, but there's also the separate side, right? In a lot of cases, your engineered control is only as good as your administrative control. You can engineer all of the signs or barrier, like physical barriers or things like that. But if people don't respect the way they're supposed to interact with them or actually use the engineered control, then it's largely irrelevant at that point. So there's definitely a push and a pull there. And then cultural controls. This is stuff that's going to capture like a broader safety culture, like a safety culture that incentivizes or promotes bringing up issues when they're found or conditions. That is a barrier to something happening, because the assumption is if somebody brings it up the first time it happens, it will get solved, and then the hazardous event will not occur. But there's some difference there too. The barrier analysis is very much like the Swiss cheese model, which we've covered a bunch. And again, just in our times, there's a lot of these that are COVID or bacteria related that cover it really well. So these are some examples, distancing, masks, cleaning, hand washing. Okay, what kind of barriers are these? Distancing, probably cultural, or I guess in some instances, an administrative control, unless maybe you have I'm trying to think of an example. If you have to physically interact with an object that's blocking you or blocking particles or something, that's could be an engineered control. Masks are a pretty typical engineered control, but as we found, right, that's an administrative and cultural thing too, if they're even used. Cleaning, hand washing, similar there. But recall, your hazardous event will occur when the holes line up. That is when, and each one of these pieces of cheese in this model is a barrier of some kind. So that's important to consider there. We've talked about human error, so barrier analysis and human error. One thing that I'm hoping you're starting to see kind of just even in your life around you is most barriers exist because of human error or human action. These are the warning labels of the world and the different things like that. And it's important to remember that our basic assumption with human error is human errors are unintentional, they are accidental, and so in that sense they can't be controlled by the person making the mistake. So the barriers are instances to help us navigate our situation or environment successfully. And we also kind of make the assumption, right, that people go out into their daily life trying to do the correct thing. They're trying to do what they are supposed to do. But also keep in mind, some barriers or protections as a matter of course. So regardless of human action, you may just have some barriers that are just part of what it is, protecting hazardous energy and hazardous environments, those kind of things, you'll almost always have some barrier around those. And the last point, if you notice in some of your accident investigations that human error is called out, or that if you're undergoing an accident investigation and you're seeing traces or signs of human error, you should almost always consider a failed barrier, because in general, human error instances will be accompanied by failed barriers. They kind of go hand in hand, and it's important to kind of keep that in mind as you're going through your accident investigations. Human error rarely happens spontaneously. It can totally, but generally it is it occurs as a result of something not stopping it. So here's some other stuff on barrier analysis and an example of what one will look like. So you're going to use it to identify, physical and administrative barriers that prevent the inappropriate actions. You will usually use this with event and causal factor charting. They work really well together, so I strongly recommend that. One of the biggest advantages for a barrier analysis is it will feed your corrective action program very well. A failed barrier will have a necessary corrective action as a part of it. But one of the big limitations, right, is you might not be able to identify all of the barriers. Depending on the situation, the complexity of the environment, those kind of things, there could be many, many barriers. So you sometimes have to bite the bullet, so to speak, to make those determinations. Now, when I say this is literally how you would do a barrier analysis, you usually do this on a whiteboard or some other large wall, as you're working with your accident investigation team or cause analysis team. You have a timeline, you have an event, the non-event, you might have hazardous situations you can inject. Okay, this is when we started to see a leak or whatever, for example, and this is our penultimate event that should not have occurred. And you're looking here at barriers and then your root cause technique applied to something to note as you're going through. But essentially, this is also where you will start to ask the questions of, okay, this barrier failed, why? Okay, why'd that happen? Why'd that happen? We'll get into why trees. I think that's next week. So, but this is kind of the organization of this as you're going through. Now, some of the steps to a barrier analysis, things you'll have to have in place before you start, and that will maintain kind of throughout. You need to become familiar with the task and activity. So all of the information gathering and task analysis steps and all those are extremely important to understanding how the task and activity normally would be done. You then will determine what barriers or controls should have ensured the correct performance, right? So these are, you're going to kind of try to define that perfect case, that optimal instance where everything works. You will then capture which barriers failed and analyze them, why they were ineffective. This is where we get into that why charting situation there. You will also evaluate potential missing barriers and controls that would have prevented the event. This is one of my more interesting ones where I think it's the designer in me. I like to look at, okay, what should have been there? What should have been in place to prevent these things? And then lastly, you'll determine why those barriers or controls did not exist. So was this a design failure? Was there some other reason why those barriers weren't considered? That might speak to some other corrective actions, right? If it's oh yeah, we wanted to do this, but it costs too much. That's come up in a few of your accidents. Okay, well, that's a concern, incentive misalignment or whatever, that might become a corrective action or a recommendation as you navigate through. Then barriers in design. So this is, we just talked about, barriers that are missing. One of the things that's incredibly important is designers with in human factors or in any kind of system that you're designing is you need to consider the use cases and the use context that some of these situations will be in, because essentially the protection of your user starts with you. So barriers should be considered during design phases. You need to recall if this is a separate point. So remember that if barriers are effective, then the hazardous event would not have occurred. And so we get into this question, right? Can people be blamed for poor design? And in that instance, I'm not meaning the designers. Can an operator or a user who does something incorrectly, but maybe they make a mistake, that's not the right way to phrase it. They make a mistake in the kind of the global sense, but they used this system or service the way it was intended. Just the system or service wasn't designed with some of these protections in place. This is something that's really coming into automation or AI, machine learning instances, right? Are we considering human error and what barriers we need to have in place throughout this? And so it's a key thing to consider, especially as we're talking about hazardous or dangerous events where safety is paramount. These are two of my all-time favorite bad design pictures. Those of you from the human factors background might recognize the staircase. This is a sensation and perception. It's a common thing in sensation and perception where you'll see, okay, well, what's the problem with this staircase? The different lines and things make your visual system fail to identify edges reliably. So that makes the staircase a very dangerous one. But keep in mind with barriers, right? We have handrails. So handrails are a barrier here. They're an engineered barrier to help keep people upright. So that is one of those aspects that you want to consider. Then we have this glorious thing. I still to this day wonder if this is real. The faucet over the electrical outlet. It probably is, but that electrical outlet might be dead or something. I don't know. But this is a great example, right? This is almost comically bad, but right, what barriers would need to be in place here? Obviously, removing the faucet might be beneficial, or the outlet. You could probably go either way. But it's important to kind of consider here. And I love that this one too, in particular, does not have any barriers. I mean, I suppose outlet designs are supposed to make it so like an adult can't put their finger in the outlet because they're pretty thin. So I guess that's technically an engineered barrier. Considering what kind of administrative controls you might need in place to prevent any injury, that's a challenge, but it's still something we need to consider there. And then your accident investigation, this is stuff to also keep in mind. A failed design is something that may need a corrective action. So you'll still be wanting to explore that. And I just wanted to go back through this a little bit. So, you're going to track your timeline of your incident. So if we go back to, let's say we're going back to this staircase. An accident happened, somebody was walking down the staircase, they fell, got severely injured. We were called in to figure out why they fall down the staircase. Oh, well, obviously somebody doesn't know how to walk. This shouldn't be our fault, et cetera, et cetera. That's how these conversations usually happen. We have a handrail there. Why didn't they use it? So, we'll have an event. The initiating event is someone decides to walk down the staircase. Final event is somebody gets very injured. So what are we looking at here? What barriers do we have? Well, you have handrails. It's well lit, which is helpful. There is an edge to these stairs, but it's tricky to spot it, especially as you're looking farther down. So did the barrier fail? Okay, well, let's say they did slip, grabbed the handrail, popped out of the wall. Okay, in that instance, why did the handrail fail to catch them? Oh, it was poorly, down here we would have a poorly installed situation, or poor construction materials, those kind of things. So that might spawn a corrective action or an extent of cause condition where you'll look through. And this one, I don't know if we'll use the second or third ones, but that's essentially how you progress through this, and you'll explore it for each one of these steps. And you usually want to identify the broader incident, and then you might have, some of these barrier analysis, as you're going down through these whys and stuff, they can get pretty sizable. So you just kind of follow it until you get there, until you get to where you're comfortable. And then I just wanted to cover this next week. So barrier analysis is a pretty short one there, but I also, we're getting close to holiday time. I don't want to overburden anybody with extra stuff, and you're all still, in general, everybody kind of picked, I would say, really interesting, but definitely challenging accidents. So I'd rather you spend your time focusing on your accident, reading through those reports, news stories, and those things. But these are some things to put in your post for this week. So We're going back to human error. What are some human errors in your accident and why did they occur? Your best guess there. Then what barriers were in place or what barriers should have been in place? Start thinking about which tool you want. That's supposed to be want, not that, to use for your presentation. So for example, Jamie, I'm going to pick on your thing there. The Surfside building collapse may not mesh very well with task analysis. I don't know, maybe it will. Maybe you'll find out that you can do that, but that might not be the most appropriate tool to figure out what was going on. So start kind of considering that. You don't have to do a report for each one of the tools that we'll use, but just start keeping that in mind. And then post a couple little feedback points for me in the class. So is there any topic we haven't covered yet, which you are looking forward to or hoping we cover? And then are there any specific topic areas that you feel like we should revisit? Especially I think I was checking that schedule today, and I think we will probably have a little bit of spare time towards the end. So, we could do breakout sessions where we pick an event and we all, a live session where we're all on the same Zoom call and we work through one of these tools ourselves. Maybe we go through human error again or corrective actions or whatever. So just let me know what you're thinking there. Otherwise, I think we're good there. I hope you all have a happy Halloween. These are great safety tips to keep in mind, as you're going through. But yeah, I'm excited to read your posts. And again, just keep commenting on each other's things. You will learn more as you work through these discussions on Slack about corrective actions and barriers and errors and stuff. You'll learn a lot more as you go through that with your classmates. So, all right. Well, thank you and have a good rest of your week.